Hey there, fourth grade. Today I'm going to start with video 3. Yesterday, Scott and Evan started their lemonade stand, and they weren't being very nice to Jessie, Evan's sister. So here we go. Scott drained his cup and tossed it on the ground. "Ah," he said, satisfied. "That was good. I'm going to have another." Evan reached for the trash cup and stowed it under his seat. "Nah, come on, Scott. You're going to drink all of our profits if you do that." He stretched his legs out by putting his feet on top of the cooler. "Just chill." "I'm going to chill by having another cup," said Scott. There it was, that mean bite in Scott's voice. Evan's shoulders tensed up. "Move your feet," said Scott. "It's hot out here." "Dude, you're..." Evan sat up expectantly and looked down the street. "Hey, here comes our first customer." A mother pushing a double stroller came into view. At the same time, one of the kindergartners from down the street rode her bike up and noticed the sign and quickly pedaled back to her house. Within 5 minutes, there was a small crowd of neighborhood kids and pedestrians buying lemonade from the stand. Evan let Scott handle all of the money while he took care of the pouring and the sweet talk. That's what his mother called it when a salesperson chatted her up. "Trust me," she had once told Evan and Jessie, "buying something is only half about getting something and the other half about human contact." Mrs. Tresky knew all about these things because she was a public relations consultant. She had even written a booklet called 10 Bright Ideas to Light Up Your Sales for one of her clients. And Evan was like her. He was good at talking with people, even grown-ups. It was easy for him, so he kept the conversation flowing along with the lemonade. People hung around. Most of them bought a second cup before they left. Evan was so busy he almost didn't notice that Jessie was flying out of the garage on her bike and riding down the street towards town. Good riddance, he thought. But he wondered where she was going. During the lull in business, Evan walked around the stand, picking up discarded plastic cups. Scott sat in his chair, jingling the coins in his pocket. "Man, we are going to be so rich," said Scott. "I bet we've made $5 already." "I bet we've made 10. How much do you think we made?" Evan shrugged. He looked at the stack of used cups in his hands and counted the rims. 14. They'd sold 14 cups so far, and each cup of lemonade cost 50 cents. Evan heard Mrs. DeFazio's voice in his ear. Mrs. DeFazio had been his third-grade teacher, and she'd done everything she could to help Evan with his math. "If one cup of lemonade sells 50 cents and you sell 14 cups of lemonade, how much money have you made?" Word problems. Evan hated word problems. And this was an impossible one anyway. He was pretty sure that the equation was 14 times 50. But how was he supposed to solve that? That was a double-digit multiplication. There was no way he could do that problem. And besides, some of those 14 people had bought refills but used the same cup. How many? Evan didn't even know. Still, they'd made a good amount of money. The estimate was close enough for him. "How much do you think we could have made if we sold it all?" asked Scott. "I don't know," said Evan. "Maybe $20. That sounded high even to him, but Evan was an optimist. "Do you really think?" With both boys looking in the cooler, they saw 3 empty pitchers. They only had a half a pitcher left. "You were pouring the cups too full," said Scott. "You should have poured less in each one." "You're the one who bought the big, huge plastic cups." "You could fit a gallon in one of those," said Evan. "Besides, I wasn't going to be chintzy. They're paying a whole $50 for it. They deserve a full cup. And anyway, we can just go home and make more. My mom has a lot of cans of lemonade in the freezer." "So go home and make more," said Scott. "Oh yes, Your Majesty, Your High Commander, Your Infiniteness. Why don't you go make it?" "'Cause I'm chillin'," said Scott, leaning back in his chair with a stupid grin on his face. Evan knew he was just joking. But this was exactly why he didn't like Scott. He was always thinking of himself, always looking for some way to come out on top. If they were playing knockout, Scott always came up with a new rule that helped him win. If they were doing an assignment together, Scott always figured out a way to divide the work so that he had less to do. This kid was a weasel, no 2 ways about it. But everyone else was out of town. Evan didn't want to spend the day alone, and Jessie. Jessie was on his poop list, as Mom called it when the dog did something bad. Evan might never play with Jessie again. Evan crossed the street and went to the house. He was surprised to find that there were no more cans of lemonade in the freezer. Wow, there had been so many this morning. Luckily, there was a can of grape juice in the freezer and a bottle of ginger ale in the fridge. It'll work, he thought. People just want a cold drink. They don't care if it's lemonade. He mixed up the grape juice at the sink. The fruit flies were more out of control than ever. Thanks to the lemonade the boys had dribbled on the countertop. Evan swatted a couple, but most of them drifted out of his reach and settled on the fruit bowl. He wished his mother believed in chemical warfare, but for Mrs. Tresky, it was all natural or nothing. It was usually nothing. When he went back outside to the lemonade stand, Evan noticed the last pitcher was turned upside down on the cooler. Come on, Scott, he said. What? It's hot. And you said we could always make more. Yeah, well, we didn't have as much as in the house as I thought. I've got grape juice and ginger ale. I hate ginger ale, said Scott. I wouldn't give you a penny for it. It turned out that a lot of people felt the same way. Business was definitely slower. The day got hotter. The sun beat down on them so ferociously that it was easy to imagine the sidewalk cracking open and swallowing them whole. Fanning himself, Evan asked, "How much money do you really think we can make?" "I don't know," said Scott, pushing his baseball cap down over his eyes. "I mean, on a hot day like this," Evan said, and silently adding the words, "or tomorrow. If we sold 8 pitchers of lemonade, what do you think each we would make?" 8 pitchers? I don't know. Scott shook his head. His baseball-capped face wagged back and forth. Too hot for math, and it's summer. Evan pulled the red pen out of his pocket and started to write down on the palm of his hands. He wrote 8 times 50 divided by 2. That didn't seem right. Jessie would know. She'd do the math in her head. Evan capped the pen and jammed it into his pocket. "But I bet it's a lot," said Evan. "I bet on a hot day like this we could actually make some real money in the lemonade business." "Yeah," said Scott. "Then we'd be rich, and I'd get an Xbox. The new one, with dual controls." "I'd get an iPod," said Evan. He'd been saving for over 1 year. But every time he had some money put away, well, it just disappeared. Like the $10 from Grandma. She'd even written a note on her card. "Here's a little something to help you get that music thing you want." But the money was gone. He treated Pa and Ryan to slices of pizza at a townhouse, the pizza parlor. It had been fun. "That would be so great, to listen to music whenever I wanted," said Evan. "I could turn you out," he added in his own head. They sat silently, feeling the heat suck away every bit of their energy. Evan was hatching a plan. The heat wave was supposed to last at least another 5 days. If he and a friend, not Scott, set up a lemonade stand for 5 days, they could definitely have enough to buy. He would definitely have enough to buy an iPod. He imagined himself wearing it as he walked to school, wearing it on the playground. "Hey, Megan. Yeah, it's my iPod. Sweet, huh?" Wearing it in class when the teacher droned on about fractions and percents. Nah, but it would be cool. At least there would be one thing that didn't totally stink about going back to school. After 2 hours, they decided to call it quits. Sales had dropped off, fast. And then they stopped altogether. "Hey, did you know something?" "Did you notice something?" asked Evan, stacking the chairs. "What?" said Scott. "When we started the stand, most of our business came from that direction." He pointed down the street toward the curve in the road. "But after an hour, not one person who walked past us from that point on bought a cup of lemonade. Not one. They all said, 'No thanks,' and kept walking." "Why do you think?" "Dunno," said Scott. "Boy, you're a real go-getter," said Evan. "You know that?" Scott socked him in the chest, but Evan defended and knocked Scott's cap off. While Scott was scrambling for his hat, Evan said, "Just hang here for a minute, okay?" and set off down the street. As soon as he rounded the curve, he knew why his business had fallen off so badly. There was Jessie and Megan Moriarty from his class. They were standing inside of a wooden booth, and their sign said it all. Lemonade, frosty, delicious, thirst-quenching. Wow, only 50 cents per cup. Here is their stand, if you can see it. Their sign. Can you see that? And their letters aren't misspelled. By the looks of it, their business was booming. Evan watched as Jesse accepted a fistful of dollar bills from a mother surrounded by kids. And at that moment, Jesse looked up and saw him. Evan had a weird feeling, like he'd been caught cheating on a test. He wanted to run and hide somewhere. Instead, he froze. What would Jesse do? Evan couldn't believe it. She sneered at him. She cocked her head to the side and gave him this little "I'm so much better than you" smile. And then, she waved the money in her hand at him. She waved it as if to say, "Look how much we've made." Bet you can't beat that. Evan turned on his heel and walked away. Behind him, he could hear Megan Moriarty laughing at him, clear as a bell. Okay, we're on chapter 4. It's called partnership. And the definition is 2 or more people pulling their money, skills, and resources to run a business, agreeing to share the profits and losses of that business. Jessie had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Evan would see her lemonade stand, see the wonderful decorations they had made, see the crowds of people waiting in line, see Megan Moriarty standing by her side. He would see it and be so impressed. He would think to himself, wow, Jessie is one cool kid. She sure knows how to run a lemonade stand.
So sticky.
And then he would jog over and say, "Hey, can I help out?" And Jessie would say, "Sure." We were hoping you'd come over. And it would be like old times. Why hadn't it worked out like that? With one part of her brain, Jessie continued to take money from customers and make change. That was the part of her brain that worked just fine. With the other part of her brain, Jessie went over what happened with Evan. That was the part of her brain that tended to run in circles. She and Megan were selling lemonade. Business had been good. Then Mrs. Polly, a neighborhood mom, walked up. She had a bunch of kids in her backyard running through the sprinklers, and they now wanted 12 cups of lemonade. 12. It was the biggest sale of the day. Megan got cracking, pouring the lemonade, and Jessie took the 6 singles that Mrs. Polly handed her. All of the kids from Mrs. Polly's backyard were chanting, "Lemonade, lemonade, lemonade." A fly buzzed by Jessie's ear. They'd been having a problem with flies because of the sticky lemonade spills on their stand. And she cocked her head to the side to shoo one of them, since her hands were busy with the money. And that's when Jessie looked up and saw Evan standing there staring. So she smiled, but he didn't smile back. So she waved. Even though she had all that money in both hands, she waved so he'd know that she was happy to see him. And then he stalked off, all stiff-legged and bristly. And she never got to say, "Sure, we were hoping you'd come over," like she had rehearsed in her head. And just then, Tommy Polly, who was 2 years old, pulled down his pants and peed right on the lawn. Megan laughed so hard. Jessie was sure you could hear it all over the neighborhood. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. But Jessie knew that something else surely had happened. And she didn't get it. The way she didn't get a lot of things about people. All she knew was that the sight of Evan walking away from her for the second time that day made her feel so bad and alone that she just wanted to run home to her room and curl up in her bed with Charlotte's Web. "Hey, Madam Cash Register," said Megan, nudging her. "You're falling behind. Ring 3 for this lady and 1 for this kid here." Jessie turned away from the retreating figure of Evan. "That's $1.50, she said to the woman standing in front of her. She took the $5 bill the woman was holding out and made change from her lockbox, focusing all of her energy on the part of her brain that worked just fine. It's true that when Evan had first walked out of the garage, Jessie had banged up to her room and tried to think of every way possible that she could to make his life a misery. She thought of telling Mom that Evan was the one who broke the toaster by playing hockey in the house, which was not allowed. She thought of taking back every one of her CDs from his room, even though she knew she'd have to give all of his CDs back. She'd even thought of putting peanut butter in his shoes. This was something she'd read about in a book. And she loved the image She'd love to imagine that moment of horror when he thought that he stepped in dog dew, and it was inside of his shoes. Okay, I'm going to have to stop there for today. I hope you enjoyed that little part of the story, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.